Hello and welcome to Armenian News Network Groong. This week in review, we have a panel of scholars, journalists, and activists from Armenia and Azerbaijan discussing the violence between the communities and cities around the world. Their call for peace on Twitter with the hashtag #WordsNotSwords gained many notable signatories online. We also discussed the interview that former President Robert Kocharyan gave to 3 media outlets in the Armenian press. We close with a quick lightning round of questions from headlines in the past week for analysis from our resident panelists. From July 12 to July 17, Armenia and Azerbaijan clashed on their border, killing tens of servicemen and civilians from both sides. In the following week, the press and propaganda from both sides picked up in an effort to align international opinion and sympathies to their side. Some demonstrations in cities around the world got out of hand, resulting in violence between protesters, injuries, and arrests. Even more worrisome, violence spilled over to ordinary citizens and businesses in some diaspora communities. According to media reports, restaurants and other businesses in Moscow were attacked by groups from opposing sides. Individual Azerbaijanis and Armenians, including children, were targets of random attacks. In some cases, humiliating videos of the victims being beaten were posted on social media. In Moscow, police arrested over 30 people connected to the violence. We also read reports of similar attacks against individuals and vandalism of businesses and even schools around the world, including Turkey, Germany, and right here in the US. Observers indicate that this level of animosity between communities did not exist even during the worst days of the war. The violence in the diaspora led some scholars, both Azerbaijani and Armenian, to call on their respective communities to renounce from street violence and engage in peaceful activism. We are joined today by some of the initiating signatories of that call. Dr. Artem Tonoyan, originally from Gyumri, Armenia, is a research associate at the University of Minnesota Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, where his research is focused on the nexus of religion and violence. Arzu Geybullah is an Azerbaijani columnist and writer with special focus on digital authoritarianism and its implications on human rights and press freedom in Azerbaijan. Arzu has written for Al Jazeera, Eurasianet, Foreign Policy Democracy Lab, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Coda, and more. She is a contributor at Open Democracy, IWPR, and Observatorio Balcani e Caucaso. Ulvi Ismail is a historian and researcher based in Washington, D.C. and originally from Baku. He works with international development organizations such as UNHCR and USAID, and has been involved in Azerbaijan-Armenian peacemaking multilateral projects since 2004. He has written on the subject and has even developed his own peace proposal. Ulvi was co-author of the joint petition drafted in 2014 calling for the sides to observe peace along the line of contact. Emil Sanamyan is a research fellow at the USC Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan. He is a regular contributor to ANN Groong. Diana Yayloyan is a research associate at the Ankara-based think tank TEPAF, working on Armenia-Turkey civil society dialogue supported by the European Union. She's also a PhD candidate at the Middle Eastern Technical University with a focus on gender and peace building. And welcome everyone, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Those of you who initiated this call for peace on Twitter are acquainted with each other, and in many ways you're actually friends. After the main border skirmishes settled, we saw some of the protests by Azeris and Armenians in various cities in the world erupt in violence. But the violence did not stop there this time, and it spilled over to random individuals, schools, and businesses. Why do you think this happened? Arzu, maybe you can begin.
Sure. I think it's really hard to find one common answer to the question that you've just asked. I don't think that this was, a widely spread idea or belief or this type of act of violence to, go in and start attacking and looting and whatnot. I think this was really, individual decision making that prompted this. As to what really prompted it, there are probably many different theories, and I'm sure Ulvi and others may have other theories, but I really think that, I feel like some diaspora representatives, we tend to live in our bubbles and we tend to sort of stay within the same, I don't know how to say that properly, but maybe like in the same sort of thinking zone. And perhaps this may have caused it, just seeing how others were getting attacked, that kind of resulted in people wanting to express their anger. And, expressing anger is very much, it happens this way. Like people go and they start beating each other and they loot. And so, it could be anger, it could be the sense of community, but played out in this kind of aggressive way, that, not trying to stay or being left behind. And I don't, again, one of the main reasons why I joined Phil and Unvi and others in signing this petition and initiating was precisely because I didn't believe that everyone in our communities supported that kind of acts of violence, whatever the reasons may be. So that's my 2 cents.
Ulvi, you're also one of the co-signatories. So what brought you to initiate the call or to join this effort, and what did you expect to achieve, and what would you consider to be a successful outcome for this?
Well, yes, I was actually thinking about that. I mean, seeing all those videos coming up, I was thinking about that we should do something, because we did something similar back in 2014. At that time, situation escalated. And it was at that time, actually, I mean, we could have done it on our own with 2 Armenians and Azeris, but I think at that time it was international experts who brought us together, like Tom DeVal and others. We had a small meeting in Washington, Phil, Simon, Phil, Simon wasn't there, Phil, Danielyan, Arsen, and myself. So we worked on that petition. So I was thinking that maybe that's the only thing we can do to stop this. Maybe it will be our contribution. So I was thinking about this. This is when Simon, I think, wrote to, this was an initiative came from first Simon, to 6 of us, uniting us, and we, of course, all of said yes, and we had both experience and something about this, and we wanted this stop. I mean, just to add what Arzu said, why this is happening this time, I think, first of all, we have a lot of population exodus from those 2 countries in recent years. Every year has been more and more Azeris and Armenians in those cities, and different segments of population moving now because of economic conditions and maybe even ongoing conflict. But also social media has grown up, and a lot of Azeris, and I assume Armenians, are on social media. So every year since, I don't know, 2012, 2014, we have more now. And of course, it's very easy to trigger. It's also easy to manipulate people like this when you have so many people on social media and in various cities. But it's also maybe people are tired, in both sides. People are tired of this conflict and what's happening every day, all those surprises that happen every day. I mean, at least for Azerbaijan, that the population that went to the streets. It's hard to say what was the trigger for them. I mean, was there anyone who helped them to get out on the streets? But it's the first time that Azeri generals been killed, and a lot of senior officials. This is the first time since '91. So we see a lot of this anger, and our aim is what we want to achieve is to have a common sense, to bring up that common sense that is in both societies, and they can try to maybe talk to their own people and ask them to, to be more reasonable. And that was the message we gave. We may disagree on those topics that we were arguing, but it shouldn't be like this. We basically ashamed this ourselves to the entire world. I have seen some Palestinian and Israeli rallies in the streets, but never this. So we are the first probably group to have this, and it should stop. That's my aim.
Artem, I think you're also one of the initiators. What are your thoughts?
Basically, a couple of things. I was just the mere shock of seeing the images on European and American streets of Armenians and Azeris going at each other was just, to be honest, shocking and disappointing. I mean, it's not a secret that many of us have immigrated from our mother countries to avoid situations just like that, especially those that were unfortunate enough to be refugees, and their exile, it was more or less involuntary, though my immigration to the United States is more or less voluntary. But just imagining that something like this would happen was just shocking. And the second thing that went through my mind was right after 9/11, this is from a personal experience. Right after 9/11, a couple of days after, I was actually accosted on the streets of Dallas as an international student being taken for an Arab, was beat down a couple of times. So that went through my mind, seeing somebody doing a peaceful protest and being beat down on the streets was just shocking. So there were sort of that was my frame of mind at the time. And so the other thing was just this conflict, as I think Olgi said, is just exhausting, taxing, and tiring. And I jumped at the opportunity to be one of the initiators and co-signers of this, just thinking that, whatever little this effort, it is an effort nonetheless towards peace and understanding, mutual understanding, something that is much more positive rather than negative.
Yeah, thank you. We also have Emil and Diana, who I think were not the originators, but they signed the petition later. And I would like to ask maybe both of you, maybe with Diana first. First of all, what went through your mind and so forth, and but also going into the potential causes for this. I believe Ulvi mentioned social media. So we certainly saw some of the violent incidents that were recorded and uploaded to social media. It was shocking to me as well. I believe we saw some calls even for violence being shared on social media. What are your thoughts in this group in general, but also Emil and Diana, around the role of social media in promoting violence?
Thank you very much for having me. First, of course, it was very frustrating and saddening to see not only ordinary people in the streets abroad getting into this circle of violence, but also some known experts, journalists in Armenian community rationalizing this violence by bringing reference to some old grievances and justifying their own both physical and psychological violence against the other side, without even realizing that by doing this they are not only reproducing the same violence, but they are also justifying the new waves of violence against the other side. And also personally, I am originally from Russia, from Moscow, and my family is still in Moscow. And seeing all this madness happening in streets of Moscow, I was very much afraid for my family. So I was constantly talking to my brother, who was telling me about these mobs of Armenians and Azeris walking and just beating each other, which was terrifying. And that's why when I saw this petition, it was Simon and Phil who contacted me and told me about this initiative, and it just took me a few minutes to very briefly check the text, because I was expecting that. First I saw the name, so I already knew that the petition will be non-biased, which was the crucial thing for me. And what was very important and valuable, that this petition was not just coming from the group of intellectuals from one community, but it was a joint voice across these two communities. And it always takes the courage and strength to call for peace and reject the warmongering in times of conflict and war. And that's why I, of course, definitely told Phil that I'm signing, please put my name under the petition. And regarding the social media circulation of these videos, and also how the media in Armenia and Azerbaijan was portraying not only this mutual beatings, but also how the way the media was portraying the killings of soldiers of the opposite side was also very sad to see this kind of language, because we see actually how human bodies of these soldiers, just because they are on the other side of the conflict, how they are being given value through the emotions, and how these bodies, how the emotions are aligning with each other, the bodies inside of our community, making our soldiers more important and more valuable, and making the soldiers, the young boys that are dead on the other side of front, like dehumanizing them and devaluing their body. This was also very sad pattern to me, and especially seeing some well-known people continuing this kind of dehumanizing discourse was that was also another reason why I found this petition very valuable.
Thank you. Emil, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this emotional context is one I share in terms of, the emotional buildup and conflictual emotions and also the sad emotions that come subsequently. What I would like to say though is the sort of the structural aspect of this needs to be taken into account. So the initial scuffles and the initial violence that occurred outside the diplomatic missions in London, in LA, and in Brussels. Well, what happened there? What we need to keep in mind is that for many years now, over 10 years that I remember, probably more, there has been a tradition of holding a protest outside diplomatic missions. Initially, it grew out of Armenian protests at Turkish embassy for April 24th. So initially, when Armenian organizations, typically ARF, AYF, the Youth Federation of the 𝐷աշնակցություն, they would organize the protest on April 24th. And initially, they would just, hold that protest, and there would be maybe a police presence, and that would be it. Later on, the Turkish embassy started to organize counter-protest right in front of the Armenian protest, usually opposite side of the street, but again, it would be on the opposite sides of Wisconsin Avenue, which is pretty wide and a lot of traffic usually there. And there would rarely be any kind of direct altercations. Later, as Azerbaijani organizations started to organize protests at Armenian embassy, and also as Armenian organizations started to organize at Azerbaijani embassies, the Azerbaijani embassy sort of followed this example of Turkish embassy and started to organize a counter-protest. So there would be an Armenian protest outside of Azerbaijani mission here in DC, and there would be a counter-protest. So to cut to the chase is this tradition of simultaneous protest created this structural, framework where this emotions could have actually, result in the initial violence that we saw, and of course subsequent sort of mob-organized violence in Moscow and elsewhere was a reaction to sort of those videos from LA and from Brussels. What I think needs to be done here is for people who are concern about this is to sort of direct attention to this, that it's a really bad idea to have simultaneous protests organized while the emotions are running this high. And if the embassies and of course the governments behind those embassies are concerned by spreading this violence, and I'm sure on the official level neither government would support spreading the violence any other country, because of course that runs counter to notions of diplomatic protocol and basis on which their diplomatic presence is codified in the places that they are. There has to be a policy of avoiding simultaneous protest. If there is an Armenian protest outside of Azerbaijani embassy or Azerbaijani protest outside the Armenian embassy, you can't organize a counter-protest, and because it creates fertile ground for this sort of events happening. And going back to the petition, Ulvi already mentioned that we did something similar in 2014. Of course, at the time, we didn't have as much widespread violence around the world. It was just concern about the direction of violence happening in Karabakh at the time, primarily in Armenian-Azerbaijani border, and it didn't help much. But those calls, they have to happen, because in the absence, we're in a worse place if we don't have the sort of parallel track to the violent track. It has to be there to give voice to, I think, a vast majority of people who find this kind of attacks, especially group attacks on individuals, are highly reprehensible and just totally unacceptable and criminally prosecutable.
So, Arzu, the petition is targeted at diasporans, but I wonder what the reaction from your friends in Baku is, or Yerevan, and I'd like both Armenians and Azerbaijanis this discussion to chime in. Is it really possible to divorce the diasporas from their homelands, and how much influence and how much of this energy of the violence is coming from the homeland itself versus diaspora being initiated in diaspora?
I feel like I'm getting all the hardest questions. So to answer the first part of your question, when I shared it both on Twitter and Facebook, the first statement, I actually got, and so is everyone else who signed the petition originally, I think we got folks from Armenia and Azerbaijan asking to sign on, who are based in the countries. And we had to explain to them that, we are actually targeting diaspora because it was the diaspora communities who were engaging in acts of violence, and it's not targeted to the people, to the people, as Ulvi mentioned, to our mother countries. And for this kind of worked the first maybe 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, but then later on we realized that it actually probably makes more sense to open up the campaign to everyone, including folks who are based in their own mother countries. But the problem there was, what's the platform we take the statement on? How to make sure that this doesn't trigger yet another wave of hatred and negative comments online? How do we make sure that people who sign are actual citizens who are interested in the peace process and whatnot? So we kind of took a stop there, and I think we're still trying to figure out what's the way forward to move with this. As to your second question, whether it's actually possible to divide the two, I mean, it's, as I said, when I tried to put my thoughts together answering your first question, I think when you look at representatives of diaspora communities, at least in my experience, what I've observed is you have the members, or the community members, who are still very much attached to their home. And when I say attached, it means that they refuse to even assimilate to the new culture, to the new setting that they live in. And then you have those who assimilate yet staying attached, and they follow what's happening, but then they have this new lens to look at what's happening in the country, to look at what's happening in wider region. And I think within the last few weeks, I've been observing this more than ever, especially, when I look at how social media helped both spread the violence, but also call for peace, and how different members of diaspora communities were encouraging other members of diaspora communities to actually say something, and say something bad in this particular case. And I think all of this kind of tells us a very complicated story, that not everyone is willing to within these communities is willing to leave that shell that they are raised in, that shell that brings all the hatred and aggressive thoughts towards the other when they leave the country. And this is, I think, one of the hardest things for me to understand, because I always felt, having lived abroad, having worked in cross-border projects, and having been part of so many different initiatives, is to see how is it possible that some of us can do it and then others still live in that shell of hatred, and they get mad at you for not sort of taking their side, or for not adopting the same language that they were adopting. So yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated question, and I wonder if others on this program have different opinions, because we all live in different countries, and I guess our experience is very, very much different. But that's my opinion. Yeah.
I think although we live that the petition was originally drafted with an idea that this is about those who are living in diaspora, or live in, and I don't like the word diaspora much, who live abroad. And exactly as you said, or as I said, we have people from Azerbaijan and Armenia asking to join, and we're telling them, no, you can't, because the language, we have to then revise the language of the petition, because we will. But when it comes to essence, we're not really separating whether you live abroad or in your mother country or home country, because wherever you live, U.S. or Belgium, or if you're a U.S. citizen or Belgian citizen, you might get attacked because of your ethnicity, and the ethnicity is those two ethnicities that brings to the conflict. So it's really inseparable, and we really have to in the future, or some kind of petitions, or any kind of actions in the future, we have to be considerate, of course, of those who are in the country, because and I don't think this is an issue where they will be afraid to join, because we had already people who wanted to join. They didn't feel insecure. They didn't feel insecure about joining this petition from home countries. So I think that and us, we were. I don't think me or personally anyone who initiated this petition was worried about themselves. We're not worried about our being target. We worry about our nation, our ethnic kinships, and we want this to stop and move back to negotiation and talks because this is not the solution.
Okay, thanks. Diana, you recently launched a project called Caucasus Talks. So this seems like a nice transition into your project. Wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about it a little bit and also, answer the question from your perspective. How much can the diasporas be separated from the homeland and so forth?
Thanks for the question. So regarding the Caucasus Talks, over the course of the quarantine period, we've been working with our friends from Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia to create this new platform of dialogue. And of course, this recent military escalation and eruption of violence became even stronger determination for us to go public as soon as possible. So reason why we decided to come up with this kind of platform is that we were asking ourselves the question, when people who are known as peace builders, who are doing the civil society initiatives for years, and just simply people who are rejecting antagonism and trying to call for peace, this kind of argumentation makes sense, of course, to people who think in a similar way and people who are already rejecting violence in both psychological and physical form. But what to do with these people, with the group of people who are thinking that war is the only solution to their existing problems in their societies? What to do with the people who endorse the violence and think that only with the war they can solve the poverty issue, unemployment issue, environmental crisis, and many other issues in their society? And that's why we thought that together, while making the peace building, peace initiative calls, we also desperately need to raise awareness on the cross-regional macro perspective scale, to raise awareness that war can not only not solve any of these issues, but war will only make them worse. War will not solve the poverty, the gender-based violence, and all other issues that our societies are experiencing in the very similar way. That's why we thought that by connecting people from the region, from all these three countries, by bringing together activists, academics, practitioners, and just any person who cares about the region, especially from the younger generation, and by what is very importantly, familiarizing the social movements across the South Caucasus with each other, we can create this opportunity to give platform to people, not only well-known activists, but also just people who are interested to speak about this publicly, to give them opportunity to share. For example, bringing together environmental activists from Azerbaijan to speak with his colleague, environmental activist in Armenia, about the same issues. And this should be done on all the thematics discussed collectively, not only within one community. And hopefully we are having this social media opportunity. We are having this opportunity to become visible much more than we would have this 20 years, 15 years ago. And that's why I think that just creating more alternative spaces for this cross-regional, cross-border dialogue is an important step towards overcoming this constant calls to, war.
Thanks, Diana. Arzu, I'm going to come back to you. Hopefully this one is going to be too difficult, but I understand that you're a veteran of track to diplomacy efforts related to the Karabakh conflict. I believe Ulvi also has some experience. So, but I wanted to ask you, Arzu, can you tell us more about your experience as part of the track 2 efforts, and how would you evaluate the effectiveness of these efforts, and why aren't we seeing more of that, or should we see more of that?
Thanks. No, I don't think it's any easier than all the previous questions. But I actually appreciate you asking it because, at the time when I took first part in these track to diplomacy initiatives, I was very much hopeful that we need them as we need any other form of dialogue, and especially having these initiatives across all communities, not just youth, because that's how I got introduced to this, but also, with journalists, with academics, with historians. I still very much believe in it, and I think the reason why we're seeing so much violence and misunderstanding is precisely because we have very little of these initiatives. At the time when I first joined 𝐀𝐫𝐨𝐵 Center for Conflict Transformation, this was 2010, I believe, and this was still the time when there was much going on between the two countries in terms of dialogue, in terms of confidence building measures. I mean, and 𝐀𝐫𝐴DN was not the only organization. There were several other international organizations engaged in this type of work. But I also believe that it's not just civil society that needs to engage in dialogue. I mean, we need to bring in the government. And what I mean by this is, again, something that we tried during at 𝐀𝐫𝐴DN Center, which was Track 1.5 initiative. Bringing in representatives from the government and also putting them in the same room with civil society and having them talk with each other rather than at each other. I often feel that one of the biggest issues in this conflict, sort of the so-called negotiation process, is because whatever negotiation that takes place among the government representatives, it always stays behind closed doors. We never get to hear about the details of these meetings. Something is said at the end of that meeting abroad, and then something completely different is said when these government representatives return back to their respective countries. And so there's that issue as well that needs to be brought into the picture when we talk about dialogue and we talk about Track 2 initiatives, because it's all part of the same process. We can't have one without the other. So yeah, I mean, I really think and believe into their importance. I think we need to have more of them. It's just rather sad to see that they're not happening as much as they used to, because clearly the situation is not the same and the relations are not the same. But going back to that, and in fact bringing in more experience would definitely help build more confidence, build more sustainable dialogue.
I'll add just my 2 cents. We know our nature. We come from the Caucasus, and we're not only linked to material values, but also moral. And whatever Diana said about those initiatives are great and should continue. But parallelly, we should think about what we're doing about the conflict, what we're doing about territories, what we're doing about the status. We have to have people from both societies, brave people like Akram Ailesli, I know Philip 𝐔𝐥𝐲𝐻 from Ukraine is very popular in Azerbaijan these days. We have to have these people to come up and say, stop. We both have false news, fake news. We all have wrong stereotypes, wrong one-sided interpretation of facts. We should do more, to investigate and to find out more. And we have not had conflict for centuries where we lived, except 1905, 2 years in 1918 and 20, and then this. Before this, we only have recorded historiographically 3 years of conflict, and it's nothing compared of at least 10 centuries of joint, very friendshipful relationships. Villages. Half was Azeri, half was Armenian. You can't have. I wouldn't be here today if my parents' village was bi-ethnic and they had conflict. So I've lived, survived. So it means that there were not wars, those days. So we have to have those people to come up and talk about the real issue as well. That tell to Azeri side, Azeri academics tell Azeri side. We don't think we can exterminate and get all territories back clean, of Armenians for yourself. Same way, Armenian intellectuals should come up and say, no, we cannot keep these territories forever. This is wrong, and all those people as a hostage. So now we have to have those people, and my hope is that those 160 people who signed this petition, those people can be born among them. I mean, we have written about this, we have set it up, but or we will tell more, but we need more support from those people to come up and say. I mean, or in those 2014 petition we said about 50 people signed, and maybe half of them were international names, or half of them. So we have today at least 7-8 times more of that figure, and they're all Armenian Azeris, and equally. So we should really talk about this conflict. We should talk about our problems and not try to avoid it, because those material problems, economy, environment, yes, they exist and they're important, but we should also consider the nature of our people, that territory is important for them.
Yes.
Thanks.
Emil, what are your thoughts on the efforts around dialogue and both track 2 and track 1 diplomacy?
I think maybe many years ago now, I can't remember the exact year, we had a kind of a session at George Mason University here. And, getting older, I start to quote myself quite a bit. But the notion that I had at the time, I think, still holds today. The notion is that this conflict has tremendous potential to continue. That doesn't mean that it should not be, obviously, there should not be a diplomatic track or track 2, etc. What I think, though, a legitimate and possible goal should be is to change somewhat dynamics of this conflict in terms of both limiting it to the actual area where Armenia and Azerbaijan border each other, and not spread it around the diaspora communities as the trend is right now. So limit it that way, but also limit it in terms of the way it impacts the civilians in Armenia and Azerbaijan. We saw some pictures of damage caused by recent artillery exchanges between Armenia and Azerbaijan, very similar, pictures from Armenia and Azerbaijan. And, in April 2016, of course, we had similar situation. And since April 2016, both the Armenian and Azerbaijani governments sort of sued on behalf of people who sued each other at ECHR. And of course, there was an additional element of complexity because the fighting at the time was happening in Karabakh, and in this case, it's on what both sides recognize as Armenia and Azerbaijan. The rational choice would be now to sort of avoid suing each other and actually coming out and saying that we're sorry we caused this damage to the other side's civilians. That was not our objective, and here we can try to mutually compensate each other for something like this. Some steps like that, I think, would really change the way this conflict, people live with this conflict. If you look back at the history of Armenian and Azerbaijani confrontations, and the first big one, of course, is 1905. You had those sort of steps subsequently in terms of both communities coming together and talking about need to reconcile, which is important, but also taking actual physical steps to compensate for the damage caused, and things like that I think should be on the agenda.
I like to go to Artyom. It's probably too early, but what can be learned from this, and how do you plan to use this experience in future initiatives, and how do we build on it, and how do we build our relationships with each other?
A couple of things I think that really comes to my mind. I mean, as we look at the conflict, we can see the monopoly of the Armenian and Azerbaijani states over the conflict resolution. And for better or for worse, alternative voices have been essentially muted, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan and in our diasporas. And the voices that exist in that diasporas have oftentimes been sort of fanning the flames and exacerbating the conflict rather than helping in any positive manner. So I think one thing that we have learned is the fact that our governments, just by their own nature, the governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan and the state of Armenia and Azerbaijan, by their nature, are going to be sort of be on the defensive on this issue. And introducing alternative voices into the conflict's discursive stream, perhaps we'll be able to tamp down the flares, And these alternative voices can be academics, artists, singers, songwriters, any number of individuals from the. And I do not mean to constrict it just to the intellectuals and the upper sort of creme de la creme of our societies, but voices that need to be from, so to speak, the people, the regular people. And I think that's the one thing that needs to be done, the reintroduction of these alternative voices into the discursive stream. The second thing is that our diasporas need to organize conversations around these topics. These topics need not be, all presented rosy. We coexisted for centuries. And there's a tradition of coexistence. That all sounds good, but we cannot live off just nostalgia. There are realities on the ground, and these realities are not pretty. No matter how much we try to prettify. So introducing this sort of conversations, maybe institutionalize these conversations, maybe hold annual or semi-annual conferences around these issues, divorced from our governmental initiatives would be a good thing to move forward. And by institutionalizing, we can search out allies from within our communities and amplify these voices through the social media, through organizing conferences, as I said. So I think that's another way of going about and doing things, and publishing articles, organizing symposiums, like in Armenian churches, maybe inviting an Azerbaijani speaker, or in Azeri community centers, inviting Armenian speakers, trying to proactively bring these voices inside our communities rather than, putting them, rather than separating these voices and just looking at them from a distance. I think that's another thing that can be done.
Just I would like to add one thing that to what Artem said. Great idea, and I was thinking about the same, and actually talked with another common acquaintance from our group yesterday. Podcasts. We could do some cool people like Javid or some others who could come up with a podcast, a joint podcast led by Armenian Azeri hosts, and on a monthly basis or maybe twice a month, and invite people from both sides to talk about various subjects, including conflict, and it can be environment, and it can be music, and those reasonable people, smart people from both sides, will improve the image, and people then majority will know who to listen, and they will know the intellect, they will know the level, what's the level of communication, what should we expect from both sides. So I think podcasts, modern day podcasts like Joe Rogan show, some kind of similar American my kids watch, and I don't know some others names, but I see new generation, especially the generation who hasn't seen an Armenian neighbor or their neighbor. For them, podcast is the answer for me. I think if we could find funding or maybe voluntarily, that would be a fantastic thing to do instead of waiting for conferences and events.
Just don't do TikTok because Trump is about to ban it.
Yeah, not TikTok, just the regular YouTube based podcast.
Diana, how do we, so what are your thoughts on anything that Artem and Ulvi added so far, and where do we go from here?
First, I definitely agree with Artem that these new alternative initiatives should be separated from the government initiatives, because I think that it's very difficult to have a very progressive discussion, a very critical discussion, just following and having engaged both these two groups, because they're having very different approaches, especially the governmental representatives of the government. They are having this specific views which are very difficult to be challenged. And also many civil society participants, just ordinary people, they might be just simply critical of the same approach that their governments are undertaking. And these views should be expressed openly, and I think that it's better to be done separately, but still on a visible basis. And that's why in this Caucasus Talks platform, what we are doing is not only recording the interviews. We already have collected number of interviews with activists and also just ordinary people from Azerbaijan society talking with Armenian colleagues, from Georgia talking to Armenian and Azerbaijani colleagues, and we will post very soon. We will publish our website together with the manifesto, which we translated in all the languages of the region, and we will also prepare the subtitles so that people who are not speaking English can watch these videos and also get more ideas about what is going on in these different societies.
Well, that sounds very interesting. And I think on this future-looking and optimistic note, I think we can end this program. I wanted to thank everyone for their participation. We hope that there is less violence in our communities in diaspora.
Thank you, 𝐁𝐫𝐽𝐤.
Thank you. Thank you.
Earlier this week, former President Robert Kocharyan gave an interview to 3 news sources, Channel 5, Channel 2, and 𝐁𝐫𝐽𝐤 Media, where he talked about issues ranging from internal politics to the Artsakh conflict and regional developments. We are joined by our resident panel, Asbet Kochikyan, Emil Sanamyan, and Alan Zamanyan. Dr. Kochikyan is a professor of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts. Emil Sanamyan is a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan. Alan Zamanyan is a software engineer in Los Angeles, and he has been consistently following and analyzing Armenian affairs for over a decade. Gentlemen, welcome. What are your initial takes on the interview? Why this interview, and why now?
Sure. Thank you, 𝐁𝐫𝐽𝐤, and good morning, everyone. It was interesting to watch the interview, as you mentioned, after a long period of media silence. But it's also important to situate this in the larger context of what he has been active in the last month or so. For instance, on June 20th, President Kocharyan met with former President former President Kocharyan met with former President 𝐁 𝐶𝐢syan. Nothing major came out of that. No statements were made. And then again, on July 10th, former President Kocharyan ended up also having a Zoom meeting with supporters and followers. So we're seeing some sort of activism, at least on the social media and on media. As you mentioned, the 3 news sources, Hingero Talik, which belongs to Kocharyan indirectly or a supporter of Kocharyan, the Hatu, which is Samuel Mayrabetyan, and Yergir, all supporters of Kocharyan. And incidentally, if I'm not mistaken, someone can correct me on this, the last time Kocharyan gave an interview was with Yergir Media, right before the legal processes started against him. I think it was quite an interesting interview, and overall, the first sort of impression that I got from this is that he's trying to situate himself as an alternative to the existing government. He didn't outright say that he's going to run for anything, and I don't think he's going to run anything, but back in 2019, he had already started a movement called Consensus -1, where he was already asking for people or projecting the image that everyone should get a consensus around him, gathering consensus around him to juxtapose himself against Pashinyan. So that was the first thing. While blatantly he never criticized the existing, the current government, Pashinyan and his team, but there were many undertones. Be that the economy, be that in terms of how the COVID-19 was handled, how the Karabakh issue was handled. He talked about Artsakh and the term Artsakh in the national security doctrine. So. And foreign policy. He provided some interesting analyses, interesting, not necessarily correct, but I think it fuels to a large extent the conspiracy theories. For instance, he coined the term the Sorosization of the world. And then he went on explaining about that. If we have time, we can talk more about that. The analysis of the global and regional sort of politics, I don't think there was anything new, anything earth-shattering about his analysis in that. But as I said, the major aspect was his statesman-like figure and his statesman-like approach to things vis-a-vis Pashinyan and his team, the current government, which is more sort of social media active and, according to a lot of people, unstatesmanlike approaches. One more thing I need to add is, if we were to look at the body language, Kocharyan's body language while speaking, he was very sort of controlled or very sort of statesmanlike. He didn't have like a major hand movement, gestures, and so on. What you would expect from someone who has gravitas. He projected that image as well. And I think image is a lot, carries a lot of weight when it comes to these issues. So that's also something I wanted to throw out there.
Okay. Emil, what do you think?
Well, this is a political process in Armenia. We've had this recurrence of former Armenian leaders to try to stage a comeback, political comeback, and staging political comeback. We have two precedents, right, with Karin Demircian and with Levon Ter-Petrosyan. I think Kocharyan is on that track in terms of emerging as the major opposition figure to the current government, to Nikol Pashinyan. Of course, there is several other contenders for that role, including, we hear Artur Vanetsyan and some other figures like that, Edmond Marukyan. We will see how it plays out, but we have seen from past experience the reason Demircian and Ter-Petrosyan were able to stage those political comebacks had primarily to do with their name recognition, also with the fact that they had some element of loyalty from the bureaucracy, that there is a continuation in bureaucracy in all aspects of government bureaucracy in Armenia, as there was previously. So we have this positioning. Kocharyan is positioning himself in that role. We can see that he, I could say, essentially has the support now of the the rump Republican Party that's still there, and also the Dashnak Tsutsune, both of which previously kind of kept their distance from him. We'll see how it plays out with some of the other figures, but really, if you look at the Armenian political scene, he does look like the most significant opposition figure to Nikol Pashinyan. Returning to this particular interview, I thought that it was, and Asbet already mentioned that he was being interviewed by basically two channels run by his friends and one channel influenced by the Dashnak party, Yerkir Media, and even though I think Geha Manukyan did a decent job asking some of the sharper questions during that discussion. Overall, you could see that Kocharyan is very controlled in terms of his media appearances. He still has not been interviewed by any TV channel that, or a journalist that would kind of ask him sharp questions. And, when he was president, actually, he was much more forthcoming. I remember his very difficult interview he had with Aram Abramyan back when Aram Abramyan worked at Amek Plus, and was a very much a critical anti-Kocharyan journalist, and he remains so. So it would be great to see an interview between Aram Abramyan and Robert Kocharyan one day again. But so far, this media appearance is very controlled. He's just positioning himself and trying to control the message, trying to develop lines of attack against Nikol Pashinyan. So far I don't think they're resonating very much. I think, but as time goes by, as a number of people disappointed with Nikol Pashinyan, of course, increases, just as it happens with every government, he will be picking up some support and mounting a more credible political challenge by the time of the next election. I don't think anything is going to happen between now and then.
Alan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I thought overall throughout the interview, Kocharyan stayed true to form as a technocrat. He was very systematic and calculated. All of his statements were, you could tell that they were very measured. He, notably, he didn't talk about his court case at all, or the political nature of the charges brought against him, or the March 1st incident. Yeah, he focused mostly on criticism, but tried to keep it objective. At times, he even refrained from criticizing the government on certain points, or said that certain criticism needs to be substantiated. But overall, he was critical. I don't even think he mentioned Nikol Pashinyan's name throughout the interview, if I'm not mistaken.
What I wanted to actually ask is some more about the substance of the questions. So, for instance, on Artsakh, I noticed that some of the discussions were similar to what we were having on our last podcast. Specifically, he raised the question of whether Pashinyan's statement that he's forging his own path in negotiations, is not going to follow anyone else, and these talks about the Dushanbe agreement where supposedly Pashinyan, Aliyev in an elevator decided, okay, let's not, shoot at each other for a while. This allowed Pashinyan to gain some more legitimacy at home and essentially take over the parliament and so forth. But as a result, one of the criticisms by Kocharyan, I think, was that Pashinyan did not press too much on these St. Petersburg or Vienna agreements, where there was some talk about monitoring and investigation of incidents on the line of fire. And essentially, Kocharyan claimed that this was 2 years lost time. And now it seems like with the most recent conflagration, there was renewed talk by Pashinyan about this. So he was basically bringing that as an example. So now, after 2 years, now you're just starting to talk about this. Therefore, you've caused us 2 years of lost time and lives and so forth. I wanted to get your thoughts on that particular aspect.
First of all, I think in terms of the Karabakh issue, from the get-go, Kocharyan mentioned that all principles or any principle of negotiation and so on is included in the Declaration of Independence, Nagorno-Karabakh's NKR's independence declaration, and he basically is going back to the source kind of an approach. So he's arguing that yes, this should be always our guideline for negotiations. And he did have a lot of analysis. I think probably he has spent some time reading about global events and so on. But another criticism that he had is especially not directly, but very much related to the issue of this national identity and how some issues or some textbook material or some in the curriculum, in the Armenian official curriculum, have been removed or changed and so on. And he gave this whole segment about how the globalization is also creating a reaction of national identity being stronger and we need to nurture. So he targeted different audiences, right? The nationalists on the one hand, basically what the Dashnaks want, and also a large number of people would be criticizing about the current government on that issue. So, and he also played a lot on the economy. So it seems that he's presenting himself as the law and order president. I know that term these days have a different connotation in the United States, but the law and order president or the leader, he fought a war and so on, but also played a lot on the economy. I found it funny that one of the questions asked basically already situated the answer or already contained the answer. I think it might have been from the reporter from 𝐴𝐸, who basically said, well, between 1998 and 2008, Armenia had a tremendous economic growth. See, 98 and 2008, it sort of corresponds to Kocharyan's term, and ask him in a very innocent way, would Armenia witness another such economic growth and so on? And he said no, and so on and so forth. He's like, really, that was the best times of Armenia, and but it's right. We're talking about a time period where there was a lot of investments. $200 million were injected into the Armenian budget by Kirk Kerkorian and Lindsay Foundation. It was also a time where Armenia's economy was growing. So at the initial stage, when the economy grows, obviously there's more room to grow, there's more room to develop. And of course, 2008, it was the financial crisis around the world. And one final point I would like to make is that he turned the table on Pashinyan and his team by saying that, listen, we're not going to have a coup, we're not going to do this, we're going to use the people, we're going to have mass demonstrations even to force this government out. If they did it, why can't we do it as well? And there was one part he said in 2018 when the economy was good and people went on the streets against the regime, what are the chances of now? It was a sort of a rhetorical question. The chances now are higher because the economy is not doing well and more people will take on the street. Without actually going in much more detail, I mean, there were a lot of sort of things that were left out. For instance, it wasn't just about the economy in 2018, and the economy might be a good motivator, but it's not the only factor to consider when you're mobilizing the people against an existing government.
I did want to also mention that, Kocharyan, I don't see him as someone going to the street and leading street protests. the last time he did that was in the Karabakh movement. Since then, he's been more of a manager and a leader in office, so to speak. But he did, like Aspet said, he did explicitly mention that the people learned that they can change government by blocking roads, and he explicitly said that everything is on the board, both in terms of the method of changing government and also in terms of collaboration with different forces within the political spectrum. He left it open. He didn't want to. He said, "I don't want to make any predictions, but everything is on the board," which I thought was sort of a call to the other political parties to again, rally around him or to rally together as this consensus -1 sort of proposal.
Do you really think that street is going to, the street component of his strategy is really something that we should even consider? I mean,
no, not in the immediate future, because the state of emergency doesn't make it possible to have any street protests, and of course the political picture is very much favorable to Nikol Pashinyan. I don't think it's any doubts that he will retain that political support for the next couple of years until the next election cycle. However, if we look at this story of Kocharyan's return to political life, I mean, it began around the time of the revolution, between Serge Sargsyan's resignation and Nikol Pashinyan's election as prime minister, and you could see that Kocharyan sort of threw down a challenge to Pashinyan at that time, and you could kind of connect the whole case against him to that as well. And of course, the continuation of this case, that sort of becoming kind of like the black hole of Armenian politics, all this whole saga around constitutional courts revolving around it, and many other sackings and denunciations and whatnot. They've become the main political story since Pashinyan became leader of the country. We're likely to kind of see that story be the main driver. I don't think the cases against Kocharyan are over. Obviously, it's just been released pending trial. The trial around March 1 is supposed to sort of drag on. There's also another case that being revived around the Paplavok, the Aragast Cafe murder from 2001, for which one of the bodyguards to Kocharyan was blamed for. So those issues will continue to revolve. Kocharyan will continue to strike back in the way that he can, and will probably live like that until the next election cycle.
Aspet Kocharyan?
Yeah, that's a very good point that Emil raised. 2 points that Emil raised. One is about the Bablavok killing of what happened, what turned out to be an ARF member from Javakheti, and there's no follow up on that from the Dashnak the ARF circles. And the other thing is that wasn't brought up at all for obvious reason was the 2008 issue. While Kocharyan, the outgoing president, ordered the crackdown on demonstrators, regardless of what it is. One thing I would like to add on what Emil said is that when Pashinyan came to power, in an interview, it was an on-the-record interview, so I can talk about that, to some of the people in Kocharyan's immediate circle. They actually did not present it as a challenge that they presented to Pashinyan. Rather, they presented it as an extended hand, that we're here to help you. Like many of the people from the former regime, former Foreign Minister Vartan Oskanian did the same. But it was interesting that at the beginning, Kocharyan probably preemptively was thinking to extend a hand. At least that's how they presented it to the new government, saying that we're ready to help and so on. Now, retrospectively, we can change that and say it was a challenge or not. But it's, I think, he was thinking way ahead. Kocharyan and his team were thinking way ahead.
Yeah, let me add clarify what I said. So there was this program on Russian television at the end of April 30th, 2018, and Kocharyan was interviewed there, and he said something along the lines that power cannot be just dropped over by 𝐀𝐫𝐭𝐲𝐶 like a suitcase, and just let anybody pick it up, something along those lines. And I think it was interpreted as a challenge. And the next day, one of the protest leaders, David Sanasaryan, basically told Kocharyan to pack up his things and leave Armenia, and that's when it was interpreted as a challenge. But originally, Kocharyan was, and he actually writes that in his book, that he was sympathetic to the protests, and sympathetic to the notion that 𝐶 Sargsyan should not stay president or should not stay leader of the country beyond 10 years. So when it was misinterpreted like that, and the case was initiated against Kocharyan, remember the case was initiated while Kocharyan was in Greece. The original sense was that he would not come back to Armenia because it was clear that he would be jailed if he comes back. But he insisted on coming back and insisted going in jail instead of leaving the country. So this sort of case kind of turned out to be something other than either Pashinyan or Kocharyan originally thought it would be.
I think we'll have to leave it at that, follow this case as it progresses.
In this segment, we're calling the lightning round from our headlines. We'll ask a few questions from our panelists. Alen Zamanyan, this week the SIS brought charges against Arthur Danielyan for the fight with Alen Simonyan in the streets of Yerevan. No charges have been leveled against Alen Simonyan for that fight. What do you make of this?
Maybe I'll give a little bit of background. In April, there was an exchange in parliament between Alen Simonyan and Edmond Marukyan. There was swearing back and forth, and a few days after that, there was an incident in the street where there was a fight between Alen Simonyan and Arthur Danielyan. And the story is that Arthur Danielyan, they saw each other in the street. He swore at Alen Simonyan, who is the deputy speaker of parliament. And Alen Simonyan himself did a Facebook Live later in the day and said that he struck Arthur Danielyan as a result of profanity or the insult from Arthur Danielyan. And so actually around that time, there was also the incident in Parliament where Sasun Mikhailyan struck Edmond Marukyan. So that's kind of the context of what happened. And 3 months later, Special Investigation Service, like a week ago, brought charges against Arthur Danielyan for hooliganism, and that is also included violence. And this was interesting because it did get a pretty big response in the media, and also a number of notable political parties also responded to it, and said that justice should be evenly distributed across both parties. Both sides should be brought to justice. If there was a fight, then the deputy speaker of parliament, it doesn't matter that he holds that position, he should also have to answer for what he did. This is just another example of someone from the government not being held accountable, and a vocal opponent being charged with a crime.
Yeah, so just to add to Alen's comment, both Arthur and Alen had a personal history going back a while. Alen Simonyan used to work for Khachatur Sukyasyan, known as 𝐔𝐥𝐲. Arthur Danielyan, many may not know, is his 𝐔𝐥𝐲's son-in-law. So they have that other relationship going with them. So there's obviously a lot of personal history.
Thank you. Moving forward, Emil Sanamyan, a faction of the Armenian National Congress members and supporters of former President Levon Ter-Bedrosyan have criticized the government's nominee for the Constitutional Court, Vahram Avedisyan. Can you tell us why they have a concern about this? And I have a follow-on question to that. The Supreme Judicial Council yesterday elected Yerevan Khundgarian, who is currently the chairman of the Court of Cassations, to the Constitutional Court. Also, Ngor Hovhannisyan, who is a German legal scholar, apparently has been approached by the President's office for the possible nomination to the Constitutional Court. So the second question would be, what do you think of these nominations in general?
Goro Anissian was brought up. Obviously, he was already nominated by President of Armenia previously, and Parliament of Armenia voted him down in order to elect Vahe Grigoryan. That was last year. It was at the starting stage of the Constitutional Court quote unquote crisis. As far as the other two candidates, obviously they come from, and Goro Anissian clearly being an outsider candidate, being sort of very professionally regarded lawyer, constitutional lawyer based in Germany, working in Germany for many years now, and previously having briefly worked in Armenia, would have been a very solid choice, independent choice for the Constitutional Court. But he was preferred. The preference was for sort of more a political choice of Vahe Grigoryan. And with the other two candidates that you mentioned, Avedisyan and Kocharyan, they come from very much of the mainstream of Armenian legal system. And this is going to be a speculation on my part, but it appears that a deal has been struck between Nikol Pashinyan and the judges on the Supreme Judicial Council and remaining judges on the Constitutional Court, and maybe even some of the dismissed Constitutional Court judges, that in exchange for sort of their leaving and Hrant Tovmasyan being dismissed as the head of the court, the ruling party, Pashinyan's party, would nominate essentially mainstream candidates to replace them, rather than sort of activist candidates that other like Vahe Grigoryan that other judges would have expected. So at least that's what it appears to be right now, because otherwise it would, it seems odd that they would be nominating judges with who would have been nominees of 𝐶𝐴𝐺 Sargsyan if 𝐶𝐴𝐺 Sargsyan was leader of the country right now. If there were vacancy on the Constitutional Court. As far as Kocharyan is an interesting side tangent. Kocharyan has a rare last name, so I kind of looked him up actually earlier. Because his name, this last name, and I don't know if there was any family relations, but a prosecutor, Kocharyan, actually prosecuted 𝐔𝐥𝐯𝐢 in late 70s, early 80s, back when 𝐔𝐥𝐯𝐢 was prosecuted, and that case recently came up in Nikol Pashinyan's. I don't know, but he was a prosecutor, and in this case, in the case of Yervant Kocharyan, who is the nominee for the Constitutional Court, I looked at his biography, and he actually studied in the evening program of the law faculty of Yerevan State University, meaning that most likely he came from a non-lawyer family and had to work during the day. And another aspect of his biography that was notable is that he was in the army actually from 1996 to 1998. Another unusual thing for Armenian lawyers to do is to go to the army and actually do the service. And he did that. So, again, there's not any sense of corruption surrounding Yervant Kocharyan. There is iravaban.net website published his income declarations, and it appears he actually lives on his salary. And that's another aspect of this. There has been a sort of a wholesale denunciation of the old system in Armenia, and long time established a line of attack against the entire system, that the system's totally corrupt, and there are no clean judges, and everybody's receiving side payments.
We also read about Bahram Avedisyan's father. The main concern that was expressed about Bahram Avedisyan was, they said there that his father was linked to the former regimes passing several judgments on cases related to the March 1, 2008 events, and that Bahram Avedisyan has never condemned these activities. Therefore, he cannot be expected to pass verdicts independently.
That's a political line of attack, not legal or sort of fairness.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that all 100% of the arguments against Avedisyan were around his relationship to his father, and that he has not condemned the March 1st rulings that his father made. Therefore, he cannot be an objective judge. Whereas, as a judge, you would be expected to not, voice opinions on any other cases unless you really have to, unless they pertain to you. I just found that to be a little bit ridiculous this week, that he was attacked so ferociously on that particular point.
I want to move forward, although we apparently have a lot to say about this topic, so maybe we'll come back to it as the nominations heat up. 𝐁𝐫𝐽 Manouchian, Prime Minister Pashinyan this week declared that the situation over coronavirus has significantly improved in Armenia. He has also expressed hopes that the state of emergency can be lifted by September. His perception is based on data from the recent days when the recovery rates have outpaced the new infection rates. Do these statistics support the Prime Minister's declaration?
So I monitor these statistics daily. I think what's important to look at is, when you look at the sheer number of new cases, it seems like a huge drop. I think right now they're reporting 200 or so cases a day. But what we really have to do is look at the test positivity. And I've been tracking that too. Test positivity means for every 100 tests, how many, for instance, are positive. That has been improving too, but on a slower pace than the actual number of new cases. And what is actually happening, and what really irritates me, is that the government seems to be doing less and less tests. So in the previous weeks, they were doing about 2,000 tests per day on the average. And the last week, they've managed to average out about 1,000 tests a day, which is half the number of tests they're doing. So just by that alone, if the test positivity was the same, you would get half the cases. And there were some, they publicly even promised to increase the number of tests. So it's very puzzling that they're dropping from 2,000 to 1,000.
But you noted that the positivity rate was going down
Yes.
a little bit, right?
So the positivity rate, we're still in danger zone on that. So we used to be about 30%, and we're now around 20%, which is still, which is an improvement, and it's great. But that would indicate you would still need to do a lot more testing to figure out if your positivity is going, in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Asbet Kochigyan. This week, the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs, Zare Sinanian, is in Los Angeles on vacation. However, back in Yerevan, the Prime Minister fired most of the staff of the Office of the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs. What do you make of this? What's going on?
Well, the first reaction that I had is like a very Trumpesque sort of firings when people are not informed about what was happening in their own offices, even ending up firing someone when they are doing something else on their job. But one thing that should be kept in mind is that the High Commissioner is basically responsible to, or is there to carry out the wishes or the policies of the Prime Minister in this context. So Zare Sinanian doesn't have the independence of a minister as much of a minister than in his current position. When you look at the list of the names, most of them are high-ranking people working, or high-ranking department leaders within the Commission, Diaspora High Commission office. And if I'm not mistaken, at least I could recognize half of the names from leftovers from the previous regime, especially the previous Ministry of Diaspora. So maybe it is house cleaning, belated house cleaning, but also some very big speculations, nothing concrete, but some sources have mentioned that these sackings are a response to the inability or incapability of the Ministry of the High Commissioner of Diaspora to react to the latest clashes in the diaspora between Armenians and Azeris following the war in Tavush.
But Asbed, the optics are not particularly good about this, right? I mean, the commissioner being in Los Angeles on vacation, and this, it looks like it happens behind his back, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could go even further that the setup of the High Commissioner's office in itself is an anomaly because, the Prime Minister appoints the High Commissioner, but it's also the Prime Minister who appoints the Chief of Staff of the High Commissioner. So there is a lot of micromanagement there. In terms of, you're just, you're a facade, you're a face, you're a PR person, but then in terms of the operations and even the policy planning of the department or your commission office is under the direct purview of the Prime Minister. Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Had he been a minister and the Prime Minister had sacked, let's say, the deputy minister and so on and so forth, or the head of a department, that would have had a more difficult optics. But in this case, I think the blow can be softened by the fact that it is within his purview. It is within his constitutional, quote-unquote, rights.
I think we're seeing the downside of the approach that we've had from the new government to try to draw a line between the way they do things and the previous government. So there was this Ministry of Diaspora. They had to change its name, and they didn't want to go into Department of Diaspora that existed in the Kocharyan times, or didn't want to make the Diaspora Department part of the Foreign Ministry as it was in 𝐀𝐫𝐭𝐲𝐶 days or whatever. I mean, they didn't want to do what was done before. They wanted to do something new, and under this High Commissioner model, I think maybe while they brought, I think, a very solid candidate. I mean, to be fair, to be frank, 𝐁 is a friend of mine, so I do think he's a very solid person to represent Armenia as a diaspora envoy. But with this format of a high commissioner, they kind of basically gave him a lot of responsibility without giving him a lot of authority. And that's where we have the situation with the firings. Even though he is nominally the head of these people, he is not the one to pick them and not the one to dismiss them. So we have this situation as a result.
Yes, to be fair, I guess we should mention on this podcast that many of us are good friends of 𝐁 Sinanyan's. He is a great candidate, and so we're diasporans, and we'll keep tracking this issue, which is of great interest to all of us. Okay, that is all the time we have today for Lightning Rounds. Thank you for everyone.
And that concludes this week's Groong Week in Review. If you like what you heard, please help us reach a wider audience by subscribing to us and liking and sharing this content on your favorite social media channels. We are available on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and a host of podcast platforms, including Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.